Imagine a war fought not with bullets, but with atoms. A secret war, high in the Arctic Circle, where the prize was a single, colorless liquid that could either save the world or burn it to ash. This is the story of how an isolated group of scientists and saboteurs, armed with skis and cold weather gear, stopped Nazi Germany from building the ultimate weapon, the atomic bomb. This is the race for the heavy water, a tale of impossible courage, chilling suspense, and a final, unbelievable gamble on a frozen lake. The year was 1939. The air in Göttingen, Germany was thick with the scent of ozone and chalk dust. While Hitler's panzers were tearing across Poland, a different, more chilling form of conquest was being conceived in the quiet, sterile labs of the Kaiser Wilhelm Society. Physicists, led by the brilliant but politically conflicted Werner Heisenberg, had stumbled upon a terrifying truth. Uranium could be made to chain react. This discovery, a feat of pure science, meant that a single bomb could unleash the power of 1,000 conventional explosions. The concept was chillingly simple. Harness the atom, and the war was won. The German war machine, the Wehrmacht, immediately understood the implications. They launched the Uranverein, Uranium Club, and began the terrifying sprint toward a nuclear device. They needed one critical ingredient to sustain the nuclear reaction and create a workable bomb: a moderator. In the world of 1940, the only known effective moderator was heavy water, deuterium oxide, D2O. And there was only one place in the world producing it in industrial quantities: the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork, high on the frigid, wind-swept, hard-angered plateau in occupied Norway. From their intelligence desks in London, American and British strategic planners, led by figures like Dr. Vannevar Bush and General Leslie Groves, who would later lead the Manhattan Project, watched in rising terror. If the Germans secured enough D2O and managed to perfect the design, the war would be over before American troops could fully engage. This was not just a threat, it was an existential certainty. The Allies had to destroy the Vemork heavy water facility. The fate of the entire war now rested on the outcome of a struggle over a remote factory in the Norwegian wilderness. The Vemork plant was an architectural marvel and a strategic nightmare. Built into a narrow gorge near the town of Rjukan, its massive hydroelectric station, the Rjukan-Forsen, harnessed the power of a 104-meter waterfall, generating the immense electricity needed to produce hydrogen and the trace amounts of D2O required for the German reactor. The plant was a fortress. German engineers, under the protection of the Schutzstaffel, SS, had ringed the facility with floodlights, minefields, and machine gun nests. The only way in was across a single narrow bridge over a sheer canyon, or via a steep, heavily guarded road. Furthermore, the high concentration plant, where the heavy water was actually extracted, was buried deep within the complex, a concrete labyrinth designed to withstand any conventional attack. By 1942, Vemork was producing a steady stream of heavy water, which was being immediately shipped to Heisenberg's research facility in Berlin. The meter was ticking down to 0 hour. The Allies launched Operation Freshman, a disastrous glider-borne commando raid that ended in the capture and summary execution of all participants. The failure was devastating, and the Nazis, now alerted to the Allies' deep concern, doubled the garrison and added more defenses. Vemork was now considered impregnable. With conventional military action impossible, the Allies turned to the only people who could possibly succeed: a handful of Norwegian patriots trained by the British Special Operations Executive. Their code name was Gunnerside. The team, led by the legendary Joachim Ronenberg, consisted of 6 men, former skiers, engineers, and outdoorsmen, each handpicked for their physical endurance, tactical brilliance, and intimate knowledge of the brutal Hardanger Plateau. They were dropped in February 1943 onto the freezing wilderness. Their first challenge was simply survival. They linked up with an advance team, Swallow, that had been subsisting in ice caves for months, surviving only on lichen, moss, and the occasional reindeer. They called themselves the Hunger Troops, and their resilience was the first miracle of the operation. The mission was simple and suicidal. Infiltrate the high-concentration plant, destroy the heavy water cells, and escape. Ronenberg's plan was audacious. They wouldn't use the heavily guarded bridge or the road. Instead, they would descend 200 meters into the icy gorge, ford the freezing river, and then climb the sheer, ice-sheathed slope on the far side, a route the Germans considered impossible to navigate and therefore left unguarded. On the night of February 27, 1943, under the glow of the aurora borealis, the 6 men, equipped with only small charges of plastic explosives, crept down the gorge. The silence was broken only by the roar of the waterfall, a roar that was their cover. The climb up the far side was a grueling struggle. They used ice axes and their hardened mountain climbing skills, pulling themselves up the nearly vertical, ice-sheathed rock face. Once at the top, they found themselves on a railway line that led straight into the plant's perimeter. Ronenberg, speaking years later, described the feeling. It was like stepping onto another planet. Everything was stark white, and the air was so cold it burned your lungs. We were 6 ghosts in the snow.
A lone security guard patrolled the main gate, but the back wall, the one facing the impossible cliff face, had a single, unprotected cable duct that ran into the basement. Runeberg and his second-in-command, Knut Haukelid, crept into the darkness. Inside the plant's basement, they found the high-concentration plant room. It was not a massive complex facility, but a simple 2-story room lined with 18 steel electrolysis cells. Each cell was a ticking time bomb, full of the precious D2O. The suspense inside the silent, brightly lit room was crippling. A single Norwegian night watchman sat at a desk a few feet away, sipping coffee. To avoid collateral damage and ensure the German personnel were safe, a priority for the commando team, Ronenberg decided to talk to the watchman. The conversation that followed is one of the most incredible moments in World War II history. Ronenberg calmly explained to the startled watchman that he and his men were Allied saboteurs and that they were there to destroy the plant. The watchman, knowing the critical importance of the heavy water to the Nazis, simply nodded, was shown to a safe distance, and told to remain silent. The charges were set. Ronenberg decided to attach the detonator fuses to a clock and set a delay of 30 seconds. They had to destroy the cells, but they also had to get out and across the perimeter before the alarm was raised. The commandos melted back into the darkness. They were halfway across the perimeter when a muffled series of thuds echoed from within the concrete structure. The 18 cells ruptured, spilling over half a ton of heavy water, the entire German supply, onto the basement floor, where it was lost down the drains. The alarm finally sounded, long howling sirens that cut through the silent night. Searchlights stabbed at the darkness. German guards poured out of the barracks, but they looked toward the bridge and the main road. The saboteurs were already gone. The escape was a legendary feat of endurance. The 6 commandos split into groups to confuse the ensuing pursuit. Ronenberg and 5 others mounted their skis and, carrying light packs, skied over 200 miles across the treacherous Hardanger Plateau and into the neutral territory of Sweden. They were pursued by over 3,000 German troops with dogs and air support, yet they were never caught. They used their intimate knowledge of the mountains, surviving blizzards and crevasses, moving silently like ghosts in the white landscape. The immediate result was success. The heavy water production was halted. However, the German reaction was swift and furious. Within 3 months, they had repaired the damage, and with a massive influx of personnel and resources, restarted heavy water production. For the Allies, a second mission was too risky. Instead, General Groves of the Manhattan Project demanded an ultimatum: destroy the plant from the air. In November 1943, 161 USAAF B-17 Flying Fortress bombers flew a massive raid, dropping nearly 700 bombs on the Vemork complex. The raid was successful in crippling the power station, but the high concentration plant, protected by layers of reinforced concrete, survived. Heisenberg, desperate to save his project, ordered the entire remaining stock of heavy water, 14 tons of concentrated deuterium, enough to finalize a working reactor, to be immediately shipped back to Germany via railway and ferry. The final act of the White War was set for February 20, 1944. Knut Haukelid, the only man from the Gunnerside team who had stayed in Norway, was given the most dangerous mission yet: sink the transport ferry, the SF Hydro, with the entire cargo of heavy water and the German escort. Haukelid, now part of a new resistance cell, had a moral dilemma. The ferry SF Hydro would be carrying not only the D-20 and the German escort, but also Norwegian civilians who used the train and ferry link to travel between Ryukyu and the coast. He decided that the world could not afford the moral risk of a Nazi atomic bomb. Before dawn on the designated day, Haukelid and 2 comrades crept into the ferry's car deck, which was loaded with the heavy water barrels and German freight. They planted a time-delay mine with a fuse set for 45 minutes, enough time for the ferry to be in the deepest part of Lake Tyn when it detonated. The SF Hydro chugged out across the vast, icy expanse of Lake Tyn. Haukelid and his men watched from the snowy bank, their hearts pounding. They knew they only had a 50-50 chance of succeeding, and that failure meant the end of the world as they knew it. At precisely 10:30 a.m., when the ferry was over 400 meters of freezing water, a brilliant flash and a muffled explosion rocked the vessel. The mine detonated right beneath the heavy water barrels. The German escort, realizing they had been tricked, frantically tried to secure the cargo, but it was too late. The SF Hydro sank in minutes, taking with it the 14 tons of heavy water, several members of the German escort, and tragically, 14 innocent Norwegian civilians. It was a heart-wrenching, necessary sacrifice. The incredible, historically vital consequence was this: the 14 tons of heavy water, the final critical mass the Nazis needed, now lay irretrievably lost at the bottom of a deep Norwegian lake. Heisenberg's atomic project was immediately starved of the necessary moderator. German efforts sputtered and ultimately failed to produce a working reactor or a bomb. While the Manhattan Project, backed by the industrial might of the USA, was racing toward the Trinity test, the German Uranverein remained years behind. The successful sabotage and sinking of the heavy water transport, a desperate, almost impossible string of missions fought by a handful of commandos in the deepest, coldest corner of occupied Europe, effectively ended Hitler's atomic dream. The American audience of the post-war era rarely heard the full spine-tingling story of the White War. They knew of the bombing of Hiroshima, but not of the heroic men who in the deepest, coldest corner of occupied Europe fought a secret battle to prevent a German counterpart. The heavy water barrels, full of D-20, are still down there, 400 meters deep in Lake Tyn, a silent, chilling monument to the most vital act of sabotage in World War II. It is a story of how a small group of determined men, choosing courage over safety, changed the